Hey gents, today we're going to talk about watches. And specifically, we're going to talk about not MVMT exactly, but we're going to talk about MVMT-like companies. So you're talking your Daniel Wellingtons, your Fifth watches, your Original Grain, your Jord watches, any watch that is a Chinese-made quartz watch. We're going to talk about that today. Actually, we're going to talk about the watch industry as a whole, not just the cheap watches that people talk about, but also how you can make your own watch company. Before we jump in, make sure you subscribe to learn about the best menswear on the internet. Give a thumbs up to the video if you like these industry analyses. This one falls under that. It is Wednesday, and so we'll talk about that today. To start at the highest level, watches are a piece of jewelry. It is the one thing most men will wear as their own jewelry. You've got basically your wedding ring and your watch. That is a way that men express themselves through jewelry, and in the jewelry industry, it's well known that there are high markups for low-cost products. If you buy a diamond ring, it costs this much money, but you pay this much money. If you buy a lot of watches, the watch parts are not that expensive, but they charge you a lot. Something I've heard referenced a lot is Tag Heuer makes $3,000 quartz watches, which you can buy a quartz watch for 50 bucks. So the jewelry world is known for high markups, and so that is our baseline. Talking about watches specifically, the world changed for timekeeping in 1969. Seiko put out the very first quartz movement watch, which is a battery-powered movement which changed the watch industry. There's a reference in the 70s and 80s to the Quartz Crisis, when a lot of companies almost went out of business in the watchmaking world because they couldn't adapt to these much lower cost, lower priced watches in their automatic movements. Now, that huge shift was very important in history because it made watches attainable for everyday customers. Most of the world could not afford a watch before the 1970s because of the higher price associated with all these. It was much more of a luxury to have a watch, and wristwatches weren't even really a thing until the early 1900s, so there was a huge period of time where people couldn't wear watches, and now everybody can wear one. So there is a lot to be said about the lower price quartz watches. I have been slowly diving into watches more and more. I consider myself a watch curious person. I'm getting into watch enthusiast category, not watch snob yet. But there's a lot of talk and difference between the Japanese versus Swiss movements. You know, for a movement to be Swiss, it only has to be something like 60% made in Switzerland versus you can have Chinese parts put into a movement. So there's a lot of complexities you can get into when shopping for a watch, whether you do want to go with automatic or quartz, whether you want to go with Swiss or Japanese or Chinese. And so there's a lot of things to get into, but today we're going to talk about these lower priced quartz watch brands that you see out there, and everybody, they're advertised all over the place. You can't escape Instagram without seeing MVMT or Daniel Wellington watches, and the hundreds, maybe 1,000 brands in this small category that you see popping up that make low price watches for around this $100 to $200 price point. It's also good to understand that in the industry there's been a lot of consolidation. If you look at the Swatch group, you've got companies like Hamilton, Tissot, Omega, and Swatch are all under the same company, and a lot of them share the similar parts. So there are many parts of the watch industry that aren't hidden from view necessarily, but they're not the most out in the open. When you're talking about manufacturing any consumer good, you cannot ignore that China was a huge revolution in the 80s and 90s when everything was starting to be made over there. And then today you talk about Alibaba, which allows a person like myself to connect to Chinese manufacturers through this marketplace in an Amazon-like way, where there's ratings and they have products listed on there, and you can go to them as a manufacturer, buy in bulk, and then resell your products, which is a huge revolution in the way that products are made, which is actually what I did. So for the past few weeks, I've been going back and forth with a manufacturer in China who makes watches, and I have designed my own watch. Here it is. This has been my own form of investigative journalism. I'm not going to make this watch, but what I want to set the stage for is that for about $4,000, not a huge amount of money, especially if I'm building a company on it, I could get a prototype of that watch sent to me. It's just a stainless steel gold watch with a Japanese Miyota movement. So most of these smaller watch brands that you see come out, they're a quartz watch with a Japanese Miyota movement, which is MVMT, and I could buy 300 pieces of this for $12 a piece, or for about $4,000, I would get a prototype and 300 pieces, and now I have a watch company. Now there are definitely nuances to this watch versus what you might get from an MVMT. The cost of builds and quality are going to be higher with MVMT versus this one, which is not as low as I could go. I could get watches for cheaper, but this is about a middle of the road one. And so if you were to take into account MVMT scale, they're buying a lot more pieces, which I would be able to get a volume discount. I could get this watch for as low as $2.50 if I have about 1,000 pieces. So if I take the core of the watch, which is the Japanese Miyota movement, if I upgrade the stainless steel, if I get a little bit of a nicer band, maybe something leather, I bet there's no way that the watch that MVMT is selling costs any more than $10 to build at the scale that they're building at. Smaller watch brands don't have as big of quantities, but then you'd be able to assume that there's somewhere around the $15 to $20 range for that type of watch. And let's say that I did want to start a watch company many years ago before the Alibaba China manufacturing thing. It would have been hugely expensive for me to create a brand, create watches, go through and pick out the Swiss brands and manufacture and everything else. And so as part of this groundswell and ground shift into the Alibaba Chinese manufacturing thing, I mean, it allows people like me to go out and source these watches. This is a simple fashion watch that came with my gentleman's box about a month ago, and this is about the quality that I would expect out of getting one of these watches from this Alibaba manufacturer at, you know, let's say it's $5 a piece if I order 1,000 pieces. And, you know, it's okay, it's a watch. The thing about Quartz watches though is that they're actually more accurate than a Rolex. You're paying for an automatic movement. You're paying for the artistry of the watchmaking and the history and heritage of the brands. Quartz watches are just as good at keeping time as others. It's really about the statement, the purpose, and the meaning behind the watch that you're getting. This is definitely not the only reason that watch guys hate these new fashion brands that pop up, but this is definitely one of them, is that the watches are extremely cheap. They are marked up incredibly for their price, and there is no artistry or heritage behind the brands. But if you find a brand that you like the design, you like the purpose behind the brand. One of the watches that I got from my Watch Gang subscription was from Boulder. Their idea and aesthetic around the brand is to have something that is aspirational in its journey. And if you find a brand that you like and you like the design and everything, go ahead and buy the watch. Look, you can buy a great automatic Seiko watch for $50. I'll link to Brock McGough's video where he talks about the watch that he got for $50 on Amazon. It's an automatic movement. It has that watchmaking artistry to it, but it's not a quartz watch. But for those of us that can't really justify getting a super high-end, really nice watch, it's okay to have something like an MVMT watch. I just wanted to be able to frame why you see the arguments online that you should go with a classic Seiko versus an MVMT. This is part of that basis, which comes down to the price, the quality, and the heritage behind the brands. There you have it, gents. Let me know down in the comments below if I am just like off my rocker or if I'm on the right path. I love the discussions that we have down in the comments. You guys always give me some great things to think about, great company recommendations, and some great perspective from your side, because I definitely don't know everything. I like to find out as I'm going, and you guys definitely help me along that journey. No matter how much anybody campaigns, I am not manufacturing that watch. That sounds like a huge headache to get hundreds of pieces of a watch to try and ship out and manufacture. So maybe someday I'll partner with a nice big brand and get that taken care of, but I'm not gonna make that watch. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you like these new video formats that I'm trying out, and until next time, gents, this is the Kavalier. And now it's time for Sheriff Woody. He's the very best. He's the rootinest, tootinest cowboy in the Wild Wild West. Woody's Roundup.